So, a word of warning. This movie is not easy to digest at all, so avoid watching it while eating or if there are children near, or if you just experienced a traumatic event or something. Now let's begin. The movie starts with an obituary about a so-called Ellen Taper Lee who passed away at her daughter's house. She left behind 2 grandchildren, her daughter, and her son-in-law. Then we see a room with a boy named Peter sleeping there, and the father arrives and wakes him up. Then it goes to a treehouse to wake up Charlie, her daughter. So, they go to the funeral and the daughter of the dying grandma gives a beautiful speech of how secretive and antisocial and private and difficult to read and stubborn her mother was. Wow, is that flattery? Well, at least she's sincere. Then, Charlie approaches her dead grandma and stares at a strange pendant she's wearing. Then this guy smiles at Charlie like, "Yeah, your grandma died and I didn't give a shit." Then some woman puts a strange liquid on grandma's lips. Yeah, enjoy her before she gets cold. Well, this funeral is quite strange, don't you think? Then, Charlie takes out a bar of chocolate and starts to eat. So Steve, the father, asks whether the chocolate has nuts or not because it seems Charlie is allergic to nuts. So Charlie says, "No, the nuts are right here," and pointing to her pants. Joking, she didn't say that. That would be fucking weird. Maybe. Well, they go back and Annie, the mother, goes to work on her miniatures for a book or something. Later, she sees Charlie and finds a strange drawing she made. So she asks, "Who's this?" And Charlie says, "These nuts?" No, not really. She didn't. In fact, it's a drawing of her dead grandma. Cool. Then Annie and Charlie have a conversation and Annie tells Charlie that she was grandma's favorite and that she loved being with her, and so Charlie says that grandma wanted her to be a boy, and then she asks who will take care of her when she dies, and blah blah blah. And to sum it up, we conclude Charlie and grandma had a strong bond and that grandma was a sexist. Then Annie checks her dead mother's stuff, and there's a family album and some books on spiritualism and magic and all that weird stuff TikTokers are so fond of nowadays. And inside one of those books, there's a letter from Grandma to Annie apologizing for keeping so many secrets and saying that sacrifices will pale next to the rewards. Hell no, Grandma. Don't tell me you invested all your savings in that Dogecoin. Please tell me you didn't. Anyway, here is a beautiful apparition of Grandma's ghost. And Annie's like, "No way, the acid finally hit, and cool." Actually, she gets a bit uneasy, then turns on the light and the apparition disappears. Then we see a weird model Annie did of that time Grandma offered her tit to breastfeed Charlie. Now we see Charlie at school playing with some strange self-made toy, or is she trying to build a bomb? Well, the teacher asks gently, "Can you finish this?" And Charlie says, "These nuts?" No, not really. I'll stop with that terrible joke. I swear, maybe. No promises. Screw you. Anyway, what's important here is that a pigeon crushes its neck against a window, but Charlie doesn't give a shit and keeps staring at some scissors. Meanwhile, her brother Peter is hypnotized by the ass of this lady instead of paying attention to the class. Then he receives a message from his best friend asking him to smoke some weed later, but if we see the previous messages, there's one saying, "Let me finish waxing my D." What the hell does that mean? Hey, is it a euphemism for masturbate? And man, these kids nowadays, in my times, we used to say, "I'm boxing the one-eyed champ," or "I'm charming the cobra," or I don't know, we had more imagination. These goddamn iPhones are ruining their brains. You know, Peter seems like a hopeless case, so let's go back to Charlie to see what she's doing. I strongly believe she's doing something productive like, oh my god, she's ripping the head of the pigeon, you psycho, and she's putting it into her pockets, my god, and I was worried about some adolescents talking like morons. So, Annie's at home working, but she goes to her dead mother's bedroom and she finds a triangle carved on the floor. Then someone from the cemetery calls and Steve takes the phone and they tell him Grandma's grave has been desecrated. And so Annie asks him what happened, and Steve says, "It was just that guy talking about the CDs." And Annie says, "What CDs?" And Steve says, "CDs nuts." No, well, he just makes up something about an issue with the billing not to get Annie worried. Talking about Annie, she goes to a self-help group called Losing a Loved One, and at first, she doesn't want to talk at all, but eventually she vets everything and tells a terrible story about how her mother had DID and dementia, and that her father had psychotic depression and died of starvation when she was a baby, and her brother had schizophrenia and hung himself in the mother's bedroom at the age of 16, accusing her mother of putting people inside of him. Holy shit, now tell me, can I keep on doing a comedy review after this? Man, things just keep on escalating. Anyway, Annie keeps with her story saying that her mother was too manipulative and that they argued, then made up, then argued again, and so on, and that when Annie had Peter, she kept him away from the grandmother, but when she had Charlie, she let her see her granddaughter, and now she feels guilty, and she doesn't know why. So, while Annie's having a hard time at the self-help group, Peter's smoking weed and stalking the girl he likes on Facebook. Then he receives a message from his friend saying that someone's throwing a big party the following day. So, then it's back to Charlie again, who seems like she's building a bong or pipe? Does this girl smoke weed too? Seriously, it's like a miniature bong to me. Well, she smokes the pigeon's head? Is this girl really that fucked up? Oh, yeah. And I forgot to mention that she keeps doing this clock sound. Anyway, all of a sudden, this blue light appears, so Charlie starts to follow it. Then Peter goes and asks his mom if he can get the car borrowed to go to the party. So Annie says yes, but she tells him to take Charlie to the party. Anyway, where's Charlie? Alright, she's having some weird visions of her grandma in front of a fire, at least until Annie arrives and takes her inside to the house. So Charlie says she wants grandma, then her mother insists her to go to a party with her brother, but there's gonna be people and she'll stop being so shy and introverted. Charlie really doesn't want to go, but she agrees in the end. Then, when Peter and Charlie are driving to the party, they pass next to a wooden stick with some cryptic writing on it. Looks exactly like the pendant grandma was wearing. Ooh, creepy. Naturally, the party's full of adolescents drinking and talking and trying to get laid, and it's already making me feel uncomfortable that such a little girl is in the surroundings. So I wonder what'll happen. Peter finds her crush sitting on the sofa, all bored, so he offers to smoke some weed together. Ha! The old trick of offering drugs to your crush never fails. Well, unless your crush works for the DEA. Gosh, I learned it the hard way. So, Peter asks Charlie to wait for him and serve herself some chocolate cake, while she waits for her brother to stop smoking and getting laid. Ha! The old trick of distracting little siblings with chocolate cakes. So, Charlie eats the cake and keeps minding her own business, but all of a sudden goes to see her brother and tells him she's having difficulties breathing. Peter takes her immediately to the hospital because guess what? Seems the chocolate cake had nuts on it. And remember, she's allergic to it. Woo! And so, Peter drives faster than lightning while Charlie's running out of air. Charlie opens the car window and takes her head out to have some air. And watch out, this scene is not pleasant to watch at all. I'm serious. Turns out there's a deer in the middle of the route, so Peter turns to the night to avoid colliding with it. But doing so makes Charlie's head crash against the wooden light stick we saw before and heads off. Charlie is decapitated. And Peter's like, oh, I'm so grounded now. No, seriously, you have no idea how hard I'm trying to make this part slightly fun. For God's sakes, I grabbed my head so hard when I watched this part, I was speechless. So, Peter returns home, leaves the car, and goes to sleep like, okay, problem for tomorrow, Peter. This life hack is sick. The next morning, Peter wakes up and hears her mother scream like, oops, I should have handled that earlier, shouldn't I? Well, problem for today's Peter, you asshole. Then there's a close-up to Charlie's head being eaten by ants, and that's it. I quit. Seriously, I quit. I cannot make a funny review of this movie. It's so twisted, even for me. You have those weak-ass saying, The Conjuring is so creepy, Annabelle so scary. Yeah, sure. Try to compete with this shit-up idea, you stupid crackheads. I'm having nightmares of Charlie's head from here till I got Alzheimer's. Well, I'll try my best and keep reviewing this twisted movie. We have a scene with Annie weeping to death and a scene with the family burying Charlie's body, and boy, even hearing Annie scream makes chills run through my body. Anyway, what's the moral of the lesson here? Don't do drugs, kids, and don't chase skirt either. Better to focus on healthier habits, boys, like doing exercise, drinking water, reading, and meditating. Just avoid indulging in that so-called cool stuff like smoking marijuana or having sex. Otherwise, you'll end up ripping your sister's head off. Well, Peter goes to school absolutely traumatized. Like, come on. You just experienced one of the worst things that could happen to anyone in their entire life. I would take the days off until the end of the year. Days off, like heads off, like your sister's head. Did you get it? Oh, well, I told you, I'm having problems making this movie funny. Just be patient with me, please. So, Peter's smoking weed with his friends and he starts having a bad trip. Feels like he's running out of air, so he starts to cry. Weak ass. Then Annie goes to the self-help group but changes her mind, and when she's about to leave, she pops into this woman called Joan, who offers help and tells Annie that she's lost her son and grandson, so she hands Annie her address. So the next day she goes there and she sees a beautiful welcoming mat, so Annie tells Joan that her mother used to make things like that. Then Annie tells Joan that she used to sleepwalk and that one day she woke up and found she had covered Peter and Charlie and herself in paint thinner and was about to set them on fire with a match. Like, wow, slow down a bit. I also sleepwalk, but I don't know. I just wake up in the middle of the floor and bubble some weird words that make no sense. Chill out, woman. Then she says her relationship with Peter is not too good. No wonder it isn't. Well, then Annie returns home and makes this horrific model of the car accident where Charlie died, and Steve is like, what the hell? And then the family's having dinner and Peter and Annie start arguing, and Annie blames Peter for killing Charlie. Then Peter, all chilled out and relaxed, says, what about you, Mom? She didn't want to go to the party. Turned down for what? Well, they're about to argue, but Stevie calms the situation down. Well, then Annie meets Joan in the market. Here, Joan tells Annie that something miraculous happened. She says she went to a medium and contacted her dead grandson. Naturally, Annie's skeptical about that, but she ends up going to Joan's flat to see what the hell's going on. Joan contacts her grandson spirit, and the spirit writes on a board, "I love you, Grandma." Oh, so Annie feels too uneasy and decides to leave. So Joan gives Annie a candle and the cheat code sheet to summon spirits and demons. Like, the cheat codes we used to have in GTA, L2, R2 squared, 2 R3, yeah. Then she tells Annie the entire family should be in the house if she wants to summon Charlie. So, Annie drives home, but she hears the cluck that Charlie used to do, so she cries. Stranger still is the fact that Annie wakes up in the middle of the night and finds a trail of ants that leads to Peter's room, and oh god, he's covered in ants! So Annie screams and Peter wakes up, and it seems Annie was sleepwalking again. Then Annie tells Peter that she never wanted to be his mother, ouch, that's painful, because she was scared and didn't feel like a mother, and that she tried to abort Peter but failed, so Peter starts crying, "You tried to kill me!" And Annie says that she was trying to save him. Everyone cries, and all of a sudden they're wet, and then there's a fire, and bam, Annie wakes up. So she wakes everyone up too and gathers them in the living room. So Steve is like, "What the hell is going on again?" And Annie tells them she has a cheat code to summon Charlie and convince them to stay and see for themselves. Peter decides to stay and see what happens, and although Steve is too dubious, he ends up staying as well. Then bam, L2, R2, space, left, right, R3, bang, the glass moves. Then Annie asks Charlie Ghost to make a drawing, but Steve gets pissed off. Then everyone starts screaming, then something breaks. And then the candle's fire grows up as if it was a Kiss music concert, but on a smaller scale. And Annie goes to sleep in the end. Like, sure, this is the best time to sleep, isn't it, Annie? Well, it seems that she's sleepwalking again, but this time she starts saying, "Mom, what's happening? What's going on?" As if Charlie's ghost possessed her. So the family freaks out once again, but the old good Stevie showers Annie in water to wake her up, and Peter cries. The next day, Peter goes to school and sees himself reflected in a window, but his reflection smiles at him, so he freaks out and asks the teacher to go to the bathroom. Then Steve calls Annie all mad, saying that Peter called him all crying and claiming that a vengeful spirit is on its way to kill him. So Stevie says that he has a son to protect and hangs, and then Annie gets all pissed off and breaks all the models she worked so hard for. Yeah, Annie beat the hell out of everything. Then poor good old Stevie arrives home and finds the mess her wife did, so he takes some pills and goes to sleep in the living room. Meanwhile, Annie goes to Charlie's room and finds her drawing book with lots of faces being drawn in the air. And then Peter has a hallucination where he sees her dead sister standing on the corner. Then some hands grab Peter's head and try to pull him off, so Annie arrives and wakes Peter up, but Peter complains saying that she was the one trying to rip his head off, so Annie promises she'll find the solution. Then there's a scene with Charlie's notebook full of drawings of Peter's face crying with some cross in the eyes. Then Annie takes the book and throws it into the chimney, but she starts setting herself on fire. So she pulls the book out and sets the fire off. The next day, she goes to Joan's house to tell her that the sheet with the cheat codes didn't work very well, but it seems Joan's not home. Then everything goes even deeper into crap because we see that in Joan's flat, there's a ritual table with a triangle, some animal's head off, and a picture of Peter. Peter! Then Annie takes a second to look at Joan's welcome mat, and she's like, "Oh, God." Then we see Joan screaming at Peter from the other side of the road, but it seems he's the only one who can hear her. Back at home, Annie takes a look at her mother's books and finds one that talks about invocations. And she finds a drawing of a so-called King Paimon, god of mischief. It's riding a dromedary, so I guess it's some sort of camel publicity. Anyway, there's a passage reading that once the king is invoked, he will take the soul of the most vulnerable host. And another saying that the king is male and requires a male body. Then there's a picture of a man over a pile of gold with the saying that riches to the conjurer. Then takes a photo album and sees Joan with the grandma. And then a picture of grandma being throwing gold coins over her as if she was in some bachelor party or something. So we conclude that grandma made like a deal with some entity to bring back King Paimon and then make herself rich. Like she did some long-term investments, but instead of money, she paid with her own family. Holy shit. And I was worried she'd invested in the wrong crypto. This is nuts. Meanwhile, Stevie receives a mail with the profaned tomb of grandma. So Stevie reacts with an angry emoji to the mail. Not really. Back to Annie once again. She opens up the attic door and hundreds of flies start floating around. She goes up and finds a headless corpse lying there like, oh yeah, that old corpse, I barely use it. Who knows, maybe someday I'll need it, so I better leave it in the attic. Then she finds a strange sign painted in the blood in one of the walls. We conclude that the corpse is grandma's corpse, but let's see what happens. Then it's back to Peter again, who's hearing Charlie's cluck again, but suddenly he seems possessed and starts smashing his head against the table, and the teacher's like, "Peter, if you don't like my class, you can wait outside." No, of course not. Not everyone freaks out, especially when Peter starts screaming like a madman in front of her crush. Good job, Peter. Very good. That's how you scare the girls away. Well, at least you tried it with the weed, and it's always better to try to impress the girl with some diabolic possession than reacting to her Instagram stories with a fire emoji. So, Stevie goes to pick his son up and takes him home. Then Annie tells Stevie there's a body in the attic and she insists on him going to see it. So Stevie goes up and yup, he sees the headless body. So Stevie believes his wife is completely crazy and she was the one who stole the body and placed it there. But Annie insists on throwing the book into the fire to save Peter. She says that Stevie should do it because she got burned the last time she tried it. Well, it takes forever, but Stevie finally accepts to throw the book into the fire and put a stop to this madness. But Stevie says, I'll throw this, but first, you need to throw these nuts. Not really. He refuses to throw the book, so Annie grabs it and ends up throwing it herself. Then, no one expected this, but Stevie burns to death, and it looks like something Till Lindemann from Rammstein would do during a concert. I think he did, actually. Well, Stevie's gone, and a blue light appears, and it seems it possesses Annie. Boy, this family is the luckiest family in the entire country. So, Peter wakes up, and if you look close, we see Annie's on the corner of the ceiling, like if she was Spider-Woman, I guess. Peter goes down and finds the corpse of his father, while Annie's still playing Spider-Man woman or some shit. Then all of a sudden, a naked guy appears smiling, like, oh, so the orgy wasn't here? Well, I'm already naked, what are we gonna do? Then Annie starts chasing Peter all over the house, but Peter hides in the attic. Peter starts to say sorry while we hear Annie banging the door with her own head. Oh my god! Then she stops. Peter finds the corner where the corpse of her grandma was lying, but this time it's empty, and instead there's a picture of Peter. Then Annie appears levitating and cutting herself with some knives, and then she does it faster and faster, almost like the choreography of High School Musical horror edition kind of movie. And then more naked people appear, like, okay, now I'm actually believing that they're about to have an orgy and Peter wasn't aware of it. Well, Peter screams and throws himself through the window as Leon Scott Kennedy does in Resident Evil 4. Don't worry, he's alive. So he goes to the treehouse where Charlie used to play, and there's like a ritual with a lot of people naked on their knees and a mannequin with Charlie's head wearing a crown, and on the floor the headless corpse of her mother and her grandmother in a reverence position. Ah, so nice to see the family together. Then someone stands up and takes the crown and places it on Peter's head, and someone says, "It's alright, Charlie." Then they tell Peter that he's Paimon, one of the 8 kings of hell, and then they've corrected her female body and placed him into a male body, and they're all like, "Hell Paimon! Hell Paimon!" And that's it. So, wait, are they having the orgy or not?